Our fantasy racing guru / expert this week for fantasy racing stuff and NASCAR stuff. Eric is fantasy racing writer for KFFL.com and Fantasy Football Toolbox, doing a lot of fantasy football stuff right now, but still the fantasy racing go-to guy. Eric, thanks for joining us again.
Sure, anytime.
All right, so before we get into the picks and predictions for Chicagoland, give us kind of an overview, a couple of minutes, what you think about the chase with the drivers now lined up. Who do you think are the guys likely to be contenders and who are not?
Well, I mean, obviously Jimmie Johnson, anytime, well, I mean, just about any week you talk about Jimmie Johnson having a good chance, but certainly the chase is loaded with tracks. Dover in particular really comes to mind. Phoenix as well, tracks that Jimmie Johnson has historically owned in the past.
Charlotte.
Brad Keselowski is a guy that I think has a very good opportunity to win a championship. His kind of hit a little bit of a bump in recent weeks, but was extremely consistent for a very good stretch there, and that's exactly what you need to do to win the chase. Is top 10 after top 10 and sprinkle in a couple wins, and that's pretty much a recipe for success. I think the most interesting case though is Denny Hamlin. Obviously we saw what his crew chief was able to do last year with Tony Stewart. Took a kind of above average regular season and just completely, tore the thing apart, and won the championship in extremely impressive fashion, winning half the races there. So, Hamlin's been very up and down for much of the season, but, obviously, comes in with the most wins. So those are pretty much the three guys that I'm really looking at. From a fantasy perspective, I mean, momentum, especially in this last stretch of 10 races, is definitely the thing you want to go with. If a guy's on a cold streak, it's more or less over, and it's just time to ride the hot hand.
Well, we'll talk about this fantasy thing throughout the next 10 weeks as we get through these fantasy segments a little bit, or the fantasy thing. We'll talk about the chase thing, and I don't want to spend a whole lot more time. Just real quickly. All the things you said about Brad Keselowski, about why he would be a pick for you in the chase, seemed to me to apply to Greg Biffle. And Steve and I had a bit of an argument about this earlier in the show. Why is nobody looking at Biffle? I mean, I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, Biffle was pretty much a top 5 machine for much of the season. I don't know, you just haven't really seen him as much in recent weeks. I'd be a little bit concerned that there's sort of a cooling off. And could be some issues with the chase. We've seen, Kyle Busch is a guy who has come into the chase, I believe, more than once with a lot of wins, a lot of, momentum, big good finishes during the regular season, and just completely was a non-factor in the chase. And I would be very worried with Greg Biffle falling into that category.
All right.
The one guy also that nobody is talking about is the champ. Tony Stewart's not really getting a whole lot of love out of this thing. He's going to start the chase by my quick calculation here in 4th spot, and yet nobody's really talking a whole heck of a lot about Tony Stewart. Could that be, Eric, because his mojo is kind of on the downhill side right at the moment?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I want to say I believe he has something like a dozen top 10s this season, and 10 of those are top 5. So he's pretty much a win / top 5 guy, or he doesn't show up. And that's, that's a bit of a concern. But again, last year.
That's what he did in the chase last year.
Right. I mean, when we came into the chase last year, he didn't really look like a guy who was going to be able to really challenge for a championship and just kind of blew the doors off everybody else. So, it's hard to say, hard to predict exactly what's going to happen here over the next 10 races, but based on just sort of that up and down kind of nature, that's a bit of a concern.
All right, let's get into the specific fantasy predictions for this week at Chicagoland Speedway. 1.5-mile track, whether you buy into the cookie cutter thing or not, it is similar to a lot of racetracks out there. Tell us, Eric, what you think and what your Yahoo team looks like going to Chicago.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a different cookie cutter track. The banking is sort of similar to Kansas, Kentucky. It's a little bit more of on the flatter side in the corners. But we just mentioned Tony Stewart a moment ago. We've talked about the DMV stat that I'm working on with Darren Faust And Tony Stewart is the guy at Chicagoland in terms of that statistic. He won this race, of course, last year. And since Luke Dado was introduced in 2005, he has never held an average running position worse than 10th at Chicagoland. So despite what we just said about him being very up and down the season and a lack of consistency, this has been a place where he has been very consistent. So you could probably expect a good performance from him this week to start the chase. So on the A-list in the Yahoo game, he's the guy that I certainly would, on the very least, want to have on my bench to take a look at, see where he qualifies, see where he practices, and so on. Jeff Gordon's the other guy I like a lot. I know you were talking about the mustache there. We'll see how that works for him in Chicagoland. He did win this race back in 2006. He was a runner-up in 2009. Had another podium finish, a third-place result in 2010. Did finish 24th last year, which was a bit of a disappointment, but overall, pretty good numbers at this track. Comes into the chase on fire, runner-up in the last two races, and he's finished third or better the last 3 weeks. So he just kind of squeaked into the chase there, but he's running at his best when it counts the most. The other A-list guy I would give a lot of consideration to is Brad Keselowski. I just kind of hyped him up quite a bit. He finished fifth, career best. Only 3 Chicagoland starts, but a career best fifth last year.
All right. We're talking to Eric McClung. You can follow Eric on Twitter at Eric McClung. If you got to pick one guy to win the race, I'm assuming based on what you said so far tonight, your guy at Chicagoland is going to be Tony Stewart.
Yeah, I like him a lot. The numbers are very good. I mentioned he won last year. The average running position, which I have a lot of consideration to, has been outstanding. He's the best among the entire field in that statistic at Chicagoland. So, I would certainly give him a heavy consideration. It's going to come down, I think, for me at least, between Jeff Gordon and Tony Stewart on the A-list in Yahoo. Because it's sort of history, the great history of Stewart at this track versus the hot streak of Jeff Gordon. So practice, the practice sessions, happy hour in particular, will probably be kind of what'll kind of make it or break it for me on where to go. But those are the two guys that I would definitely focus on.
I think by my real quick mental math, we have 3 Toyotas in the chase, 3 qualifiers, 2 from Michael Waltrip Racing, of course, Denny Hamlin from Joe Gibbs. Kyle Busch famously didn't get in. I think you have to look at Busch as a contender most weeks, depending on where you go. Anybody in that group of 4 cars got potential to steal one this week at Chicago?
Yeah, well, on the B list in the Yahoo game, I think Clint Boyer and Mark Martin are probably your 2 best options. Martin won at Chicagoland back in 2009, finished 9th last year, finished 3rd last week. And despite only making 17 starts this season, he leads the series with 4 poles. So qualifying is typically going to go very well for Mark Martin. You can score some bonus points there. So he's a guy you definitely would consider. Boyer has 5 top 10s in his 6 career starts at Chicagoland. Of course, he won last week. He's got 5 finishes of 8th or better the last 6 races of the season. I think of all the chase guys, I think Boyer, I've liked Boyer the last couple of years. I've always said that if he was ever a focal point of a team like he is right now, I really think he's a guy who could be a championship type of guy. He's very consistent. There's no one type of track where Clint Boyer is weak on. We saw that especially this year. He won on a road course after being very good over the last couple of years at those types of tracks. So I think if you're going to look at a dark horse kind of guy in the chase, I think Clint Boyer really fits that mold very well.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Okay, now you go to your C list for Yahoo. I'm assuming we're still in the Sam Hornish camp?
Yeah, I mean, certainly no reason to go otherwise. Hornish has been running very, very well. Looks like a completely different driver than, when we saw him a couple of years ago, earned the nickname Sideways Sam, and just with a real train wreck out there. But I don't know if just the time of the Nationwide car or just an improvements in intensity or what the deal was. But, yeah, he's, challenging for top 15s, top 10s pretty much week in, week out. We know he's not going to be driving that car next season, but the way he's going, could very well land a job somewhere. So, yeah, I no reason to really deviate from him on the C list. Trevor Bayne's on the entry list this week. Eric Almirola also gets a lot of consideration on the C list. So those are pretty much the 3 three names you're going to juggle around there, but I've pretty much been just going with Hornish week in and week out right now.
All right, he is Eric McClung. You can follow him on Twitter at Eric McClung and read all his fantasy racing stuff at KFFL.com and his fantasy football advice at fantasyfootballtoolbox.com. And also we'll put up a highlight of this interview on our Facebook page and YouTube page and the Bench Racing with Steve and Charlie blog later on tomorrow. So, Eric, thanks again for your time. Talk to you in a couple weeks. Good luck with your picks, and we'll see how it turns out.
All right, sounds good. Anytime.
All right, Eric McClung.
Thank you, sir.